Some more stories about bullying. Grab a blanket, turn off your lights, and let's hear stories about bullying not just from kids, but from teachers. Shitty kid. First post. Apologize if format or content is unfit for you fine folks. So this happened when I was about 7 or 8 years old. I was at a baseball game of my older brothers with the rest of my family. The field we were at happened to be at the high school all of us had or would attend. About halfway through the game, my older sister and I were bored, and there were other kids there and a big, somewhat secluded area. Upon the stony bleachers, my family and the rest of the spectators happily watched the rival teams play ball. While my parents were caught up watching my brother do his catcher thing, my sister and I encountered an older boy, probably between 10 to 13. He was much bigger than me at the time. Right away I could tell he was the bully type, and he set about calling my sister Scab Pizza Face. She didn't have bad acne, and myself the Pillsbury Doughboy. I was kinda tubby, amongst other vulgar things I fortunately don't recall. His insults annoyed me, and his taunting my sister genuinely upset me, but it was his audacity to pin me against this secluded tree and threaten both my sister and myself that truly enraged me. It wasn't as though I limply allowed him to restrain me, but try as I might, I couldn't struggle from his larger mass and wasn't much of a scrapper. I made little attempt to pick a fight. Apart from my retorts to his weak-ass insults about me, it was mainly the feeling of being helpless by my own accord, as I was too embarrassed to cry for my parents and distract them from my brother's game they had come to watch, or lash out myself as I feared he'd strike back. Or worse, target my sister. Eventually, he lost interest or my sister helped me free. I don't remember exactly. But we didn't bring it up until after we'd left the game. This isn't much a tale compared to countless other posts on the subreddit, but it was a notable experience I still think of from time to time. Fortunately, I've learned a thing or 12 about defending myself since. Anyways, I just wanted to share my story as it's one of the more upsetting from my childhood, which I suppose is a blessing. So, shitty kid, let's not meet again. I know I will not be so passive next time. Bullied by racist hillbillies. During my grade 9 year, which is the final stages of school here, before everyone goes off to whatever high school they want to be educated by, I went to 3 different schools. 3 weeks into the new semester after the summer break, my family moved across the country, from a, on paper, large city to a village on the countryside. I had to travel to school either by bus or by car to the new school. I have a phobia of public transportation, so I refused to take the bus. My mother had to drive me to school and back from school in the afternoon every day. I don't think me having to take the bus would have changed the outcome of my experience in the school anyways. The new school was so much larger than the one I had gone to previously, and the climate of people were altogether very different. It had students from all villages close to the town where the school was placed. I would suppose that a lot of the students were not as genetically diverse than most other people in the Western world. The school had very little amount of foreigners and a huge portion of racist. My new class had just 3 other girls, and the rest of the class was just guys. It soon became clear that they didn't like foreigners, and by that I mean anyone that wasn't from that said part of the country. Most of the guys seemed to be racist, bullying anyone who didn't belong. One of them bragged to have hacked into NASA, and one of them had killed a bat that they found in the classroom. The only sane person in my class was a girl from Iran. Honestly, don't know how she managed to go to that school for so long when I didn't last for a very long time. At one time, I talked to the school counselor about the bullying, but when shit hit the fan, she chose to believe the guy's side of the story and not mine. To make friends, I added people from school on MSN. I didn't know who they were or if they even went to my school. Some of the people were nice, some never said anything, and some were just not my cup of tea. The MSN experience didn't work out as I had planned to. A few weeks into the new semester, after the winter holidays, I was added into a group chat on MSN with people from my school. It became a witch hunt, with me being the hunted one. I got out of there, but they kept popping up in private chats or just added back into the large group. I got messages saying stuff like they plan to assault me in a group of all the guys in school and whatnot. Me being a girl, I reasoned that the outcome would not be very pleasant, so I refused to return to school. I guess this experience wasn't as scary as many other stories on here, but when this happened, I avoided windows for weeks. My parents had to clean out my locker in school and talk to my teachers. I avoided the town where the school was located like the plague for years and never went there alone. I abandoned my MSN and made a new one, had my friend log into it, and deleting membership to sites in my name. I have kept a yearbook from the school with names of everyone just in case. I don't think the police were contacted. I don't think it would have led anywhere because I wasn't physically harmed. I hope I never get to meet any one of them again. And if I do, I hope they have a shitty life. My biggest bully. I'm not certain that this story belongs on this sub, but as it involves a story that does involve a level of stalking, I figure I would post it here. To gain a proper context of this story, I should explain some things about the town I grew up in. I lived, and I still live, in one of the wealthier countries in the US. You have towns that fall in the low middle class bracket, with the majority being middle to upper middle class. I lived in one of those towns. At the time of the story, about 95 to 96, the majority of this town was Caucasian, with a few Hispanic and Asian families. Seeing as I am a minority, I was used to being teased and or bullied due to the color of my skin. As it was a suburban neighborhood, it never went beyond racial slurs and light bullying, though. On to the story. The town has 5 schools, not including the Catholic school. There are 2 that cater to the pre-K to 5th grade crowd, while 2 others that go from pre-K to 8th grade, with a high school that takes in children from the north and south sides respectively. I was attending the pre-K to 5th grade on the north side at the time. I never heard much about a particular teacher until it was getting close to when I was entering the 5th grade. But apparently everyone wanted to be in his class. His name was John. He had been teaching at the school for a number of years. His family participated in many town events, and he was the coach for the high school baseball and softball teams for a number of years after this incident occurred. Parents loved him so much that they would push for their children to attend his class. for the first month or so, I could see why everyone loved him. He taught in a way that was quirky but practical. He liked the children to engage in their studies rather than feel the need to cram it in before dismissing it. He had passion for every lesson he taught. He loved to joke around and get his students laughing whenever possible. That's what led to the beginning of when things began to go sour. One day, he had told a particularly funny anecdote. Everyone in the class began laughing. One by one, the kids began to quiet down until one student, AJ, was the only one left laughing. To this day, I do not know the motivation behind it, but AJ could not calm himself down. John walked behind him and, in a swift movement, grabbed the back of his head, slammed it twice against his desk, before pulling it back up. AJ sort of toppled over and fell to the ground. Everyone in the classroom was silent. John then began to semi-kick and sweep AJ out of the classroom until he was in the hallway. And then, as though nothing had happened, he continued going on with his lesson. The next day, AJ was absent, we had a substitute teacher, and all the students were being called down to the principal's office. When I was called to the principal's, along with him was a police officer, a man and a woman in suits. They wanted to know what had happened yesterday in class. I told them what I had seen, and I was sent back up to class. 2 days later, AJ was still absent, but John was back to teaching. I really need to stress that John and his family were very well connected and well liked throughout the town. I say this because this happened almost 20 years ago, and I still cannot understand how, number one, he was allowed to keep his job, and number two, he knew that I had told the truth. From then on, the abuse began lightly. The first thing John did is begin volunteering me to answer any and all questions. It made no difference if other children raised their hands when he asked a question. He would always just call on me. I was always shy and never liked to stand out in a crowd, and the more he did this, the more I began to become nervous. Whenever I didn't know the question, he would chuckle and say things like, "Of course you don't," or "I don't expect much from you." After a few weeks, I began receiving detention for others misbehaving. If kids were caught talking or passing notes, it was my fault, even if I was sitting across the room. The first thing he did, since I was obviously a troublemaker, was pick up my desk and move me to the back of the room near the closets. As I was adopted, it was well known in my town as I had made a speech about it. The next step was having me face the wall, as only true Americans should be allowed to learn. One particular incident that I'll never forget is when a classmate made a paper plane and threw it across the room. When John saw that, I had detention for the afternoon. I had detention almost every afternoon for the rest of the year. When everyone else had left, his assignment for me was to write a 500-word essay on the history of aviation. Keep in mind, I had no books. We were not learning this in social studies, and I was a 10-year-old. I was sitting in the classroom until 4:30 when I finally stood up. "Where do you think you're going?" he asked, standing up to match my movements. "I'm leaving. I can't do this, and my mom is waiting for me outside." When I saw that he didn't believe that, I dashed for the door without my books or backpack, and bolted down the stairs until I hit the first floor. I breathed a sigh of relief, but it was cut short as I heard the second floor stairway door slam open and his footsteps rushing down the stairs. I bolted out of the back doors and did not stop running until I was down the block from my house. At the time, both of my parents were working. My mom would normally get home at around 3 to 4, whereas my dad would work until 6 to 9 at night. My mom initially thought that I was saying these things about my teacher because I wanted the attention. But when it started to become common for me to come home and crawl into a fetal position as I cried, she began doing some investigating. Before I knew it, my mom was at the school after hours almost every day, fighting for justice or to have me placed in another classroom. Much later in my life, I heard that my mom had a meeting with the principal and John. She explained what I told her was happening. John's response to her was, "I don't really see what I'm wrong doing here," with a smug grin on his face. The principal believed me and my mom and was willing to fight for me. This is why I say that I wanted to stress that him and his family had leverage in town. The day the principal promised us that he would begin investigating into the matter, the Board of Education made him an offer. In exchange for dropping any investigation, they would promote him to superintendent. Immediately he was gone, and we had a substitute principal. I would think that he was told that he was there until a replacement principal could be found. No investigations were ever launched, and any further complaints to the temporary principal were met with, "My hands are tied, and there's nothing we can do." This story can continue on for a while, but I'll focus on what happened as a form of retaliation for getting my mother involved. One day right before recess, John told my classmates, while I was in the room, that I was not a true American, and people like me needed to learn my place. He suggested that they do what they felt right they should do to make me feel welcome on the playground, and to spread the word to the kids in the other classes. The first day I went outside to play for lunch, I had 2 kids double team me. If I even tried to take a swing, another kid who was standing around would push me so that I would lose my balance. Since John had taken the volunteer role of watching over the kids during recess and lunchtime, no one came to my aid. For the rest of the school year, I was eating my lunch and spending my recess and lunch periods inside, near the stairwell with my niece and a few other special education kids to keep me company. By the end of the school year, I had gotten used to sitting outside of the classroom for portions of the class. Detentions were common, and my mother was in the office almost every day. What I was afraid of most was that everyone from my class would be transferred over to the northern pre-K to 8th grade school. And since most of them had taken to beating me up and on and off the playground, I feared that this would continue. I do not know what had to be done, but I was ordered to see child psychology, and there was an exception granted so that I could go to the counterpart school on the southern side of town. I have relayed this story, and I know it sounds far-fetched or completely made up. After all, how could someone get away with all of this without any repercussions? To be honest, I do not have all of the answers. I discovered later that, besides AJ, whose parents began at-home teaching from then on out, I was the only one who had told the truth about what had happened. Later on, kids admitted that their parents had told them to lie if they were asked about what took place. When you have a teacher with tenure and a solid track record, who is a pillar in the local community and donates money and resources to the town, versus the words of two 10-year-old kids. I guess it was not enough to hold it against him. I spoke to the old principal when I hit adulthood about the entire ordeal, and he admitted that John had connections with the police and CPS. And though he hated to admit it, the principal had been bribed to keep his mouth shut and move on. I told him that I held nothing against him and still speak to him on a rare occasion. I can say that John was a defining person in my life. He changed the way how I saw the world, people, and the issues caused from that ordeal left me with issues that I still deal with today. Even when I was 17, I would still have people who would throw food, drinks, once a rock at me because it was what they had been told to do by a teacher 7 years ago. As all I could do was make sure that my nieces and nephews never had to deal with him, and try to move on as best as I could. The last I heard, he still coaches baseball and softball and still teaches. He still lives in the same house he lived in when I had him as a teacher. Though I had seen him around town, I had never spoken once to him because since 5th grade and the one time where we were close enough to see each other, it was obvious that he couldn't recognize me. That's my story of the worst bully I've ever had. Not from the hands of a student, but from a teacher. I apologize if this does not belong in this sub. If it should be posted anywhere else, please be kind and point me towards where it should be posted. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. I will try to answer what I can. If I am unclear about anything in particular, I am very sorry. I am writing this while I'm very tired, and I'm recalling an event that took place almost 20 years ago.